The sports complex conference hall looked more like a staged courtroom than a press event. Rows of folding chairs, banners repeating sponsor logos until your eyes blurred, microphones lined up on the dais like soldiers awaiting orders. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright, flattening every face, turning sweat into part of the decor. At the back wall, cameras crowded shoulder to shoulder, their red tally lamps blinking alive whenever a lens decided the moment might sell. The young fighter arrived late, and not by accident. He came in loose, zipper of his tracksuit half open, chain gleaming at his collarbone. He let the room clock him before he even sat down. He leaned back when he finally did, chair legs squeaking under his weight, grin wide enough to be contagious. His hands drummed casually on the table, like the microphones in front of him had been placed for his amusement. The moderator began with soft pitches, training updates, general preparation, polite noise to warm the air. The fighter played along, but with the kind of half-smile that said, "None of this matters until I make it matter." Each laugh he threw landed heavier than it should have, like the audience was complicit in letting him control the tempo. A couple of reporters chuckled even when the joke was thin. Better to join than to look like you'd missed it. It shifted when a radio man in the second row raised his hand without waiting. His voice carried broadcast confidence. "People keep asking," he said. "You ever watch Chuck Norris fight? I don't mean the movies, I mean the tournament tapes." The room tilted. The fighter straightened, not serious, but sharper, like a predator catching a scent. He paused just long enough for the lenses to lean closer, for the microphones to hum with static anticipation. "Chuck Norris?" he repeated, slow, deliberate. "He's an actor. A brand. Back in his day, sure. But today? That style wouldn't last a minute in a real fight." The first laugh burst out nervously. Then another. Then the dam broke. Half the room laughing too loudly, half frozen in surprise. Somewhere in the middle, a whistle pierced. Then a hiss of disapproval. The moderator reached for his water, as if sipping might cool the air. The fighter leaned forward, grin sharper now, pressing his advantage. "Respect to the pioneers," he added, letting the word respect drip with condescension. "But fighting evolves. Angles, speed, real pressure. Guys like me, we'd run circles around that stuff." A veteran reporter with lines under his eyes asked flatly, "So you're saying you'd beat him?" The kid tilted his head, mock thoughtful. "Beat him? I'd teach him." He let it hang. "Maybe he could learn something." Phones came up like a rising tide. Screens glowed, live streams snapped open, comments scrolled before his sentence even finished. Within the hour, clips of his smirk filled feeds. One edit looped his line. Wouldn't last a minute. Over old footage of Norris bowing at tournaments. Captions baited the algorithm. Comments split the internet in two. "He's right. Evolution wins" versus "say that to his face." Producers in the room were already writing headlines on their way out. A blogger whispered into his phone as if narrating history, "Young lion calls out the old myth." The fighter caught it all and leaned closer into the microphones, voice dripping with mock generosity. "Actually, set it up. Exhibition. Friendly. For charity. Let the legend stretch his legs. We'll give him," he mimed pressing a stopwatch, "a minute." The laughter returned, nervous and knowing at once. The room had been flipped into his theater. Reporters pushed questions over each other. "Would you really? When? How fast?" He answered with variations of yes, each cockier than the last. Cameras zoomed tight on his fingers, pressing that invisible stopwatch. By evening, the clip owned the internet. Talk radio callers turned their commutes into debates about generations, about respect, about myths. Morning anchors played split-screen reels, his grin beside Norris's younger face frozen in stills, and tried to mask excitement as analysis. Threads appeared with grainy footage of Norris in white GIs, arms raised after championships most of the internet had never heard of. But the noise drowned even that archive within hours. The next day, Norris walked out of a modest gym, cap pulled low, car keys in hand. He looked like a man whose day wasn't built for cameras, but microphones sprouted anyway, voices calling, "He says you're just an actor." Response? He paused at the car door, looked up once. The footage caught the moment, street sounds cutting out as if the city itself was waiting. His voice was even, nothing forced. Loud words usually belong to someone who's never felt the silence of a real fight. He got in the car. The door closed with a thud that ended the clip perfectly. That one line moved faster than any boast. It spread raw, stripped of context, carried by people who didn't even watch fights. Screenshots layered his words over sunsets, over black and white stills of battered gyms. Memes called it noise versus silence. The kid's stopwatch looped beside Norris, walking a hallway alone. Everyone picked a side, but the weight of the sentence shifted the balance. Promoters, who swore they were finished with gimmick matches, made calls. Lawyers drafted exhibition clauses, polished with liability shields. A city councilman smiled for cameras and said, "Community," twice. The idea became a date on a poster. 3 rounds, Los Angeles, sold out before the second week. When the fighter announced on a live stream that all his fans should wear white, so cameras would see the future in the crowd, comments flooded beneath. Among them, one lingered before disappearing in the scroll, "Careful what you ask silence for. It answers." And somewhere between the last media hit and the first ticket printed warm with its barcode, the stopwatch he'd mocked had turned into a clock the whole country could hear. It was ticking. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. Weeks didn't pass so much as coil tighter. The bout wasn't just on the calendar anymore, it was in the bloodstream of the country. Sports channels ran segments daily. Late-night shows cracked jokes, and even people who hadn't cared about fighting in decades found themselves repeating 2 lines. 1 minute. The silence of a real fight. They'd become something larger than quotes. Rallying cries, depending on which side you stood. The young fighter thrived on it. Cameras were invited into his gym, where he smashed boards into splinters and strutted in front of the press. "This isn't even warm-up speed," he said, towel around his neck, sweat staged to look effortless. "He'll see what real fighting looks like." His sparring partners smiled on cue, feeding the theater. Clips hit social feeds within hours. Slowed footage, dramatic soundtracks, hashtags like #NextEra and #1minute. Bars and college gyms repeated the words as gospel. "He's too old. The game's evolved. It'll be over quick." For every voice cheering, though, another surfaced footage of Norris. Grainy phone videos of him training alone in a bare room. No logos, no music. His movements were slower, but every strike looked like it landed exactly where he intended. The posts didn't trend as fast, but captions cut deep. Real power doesn't need noise. You can hear the control. The divide hardened. Teenagers posted memes calling him Grandpa Karate. Older fans countered with memories of tournaments won in smoke-filled halls, stories younger audiences dismissed as folklore. Arguments spilled into diners, office break rooms, and kitchen tables. Fathers swore the legend still had it. Sons laughed, waving phones lit with the kid's latest boast. The fight was already happening, only the ring was missing. Promoters barely needed to intervene. Billboards appeared in Los Angeles. Two faces in profile, black background, a single line, noise versus silence. Tickets disappeared in hours, resold online for championship-level prices. The word exhibition had no meaning anymore. The fighter doubled down, recording a clip from the gym. He's training in silence because he knows. Deep down, he knows. That's fear. His grin looped endlessly on TikTok. Meanwhile, Norris gave nothing. Not a word, not a video, not even a shrug. Paparazzi caught him once leaving a quiet gym, duffel bag over his shoulder, stopping only to shake a janitor's hand. That silent gesture was dissected online as carefully as the fighter's boasts. He's above it. He has nothing left. The weigh-in sealed the mood. The kids strutted shirtless, flexing, shouting, "Don't blink!" 1 round. His side of the room erupted in chants. Norris stepped on the scale in a plain t-shirt, nodded once, and walked off without comment. The cheers that followed weren't loud in number but sharp, like steel on steel. When organizers announced the walk order, youth first, Norris second, the crowd understood. For some, it was trivial. For others, it was the opening line of a story already writing its ending. By the time night fell on Los Angeles, anticipation was no longer abstract. It lived in the air, in the faces staring down countdown clocks on phones and screens. The city was breathing in sync with the coming fight. And when the last sunbeam dropped behind the skyline, the wait was done. The arena glowed like a living thing, its skin made of thousands of screens, flashbulbs, and restless voices. Inside, every seat was filled, the hum of anticipation so thick it felt like static clinging to the skin. The crowd was no longer an audience, it was a force, a third participant, waiting for the bell to make them erupt. Even before the first fighter stepped out, chants clashed in waves. 1 minute! 1 minute! From one side, answered by a steadier rhythm, chuck, 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 from the other. The young fighter came first, just as the posters promised. Music blasted heavy bass through the speakers, a track chosen less for meaning than for volume. He emerged with a grin stretched wide, arms raised like he'd already won. Spotlights carved his outline in gold and white, cameras catching the beads of sweat on his forehead, even though they looked suspiciously applied. He played his part well, spinning once, shadowboxing the air, throwing a high kick that barely missed a camera crane. His supporters screamed his name, signs and shirts lifted high. For them, he wasn't walking to a fight. He was walking to coronation. He reached the ring and leaned against the ropes, laughing, pointing at the crowd as if their noise were his fuel. He mouthed words into the cameras, too easy, before stretching his arms across the top rope, lounging like it was his living room couch. He wanted the room to see comfort, to smell his confidence. Then the lights died. Not dimmed, died. The bass cut mid-beat, leaving only the ragged edge of the crowd's scream, which faltered into silence. A single white spotlight clicked on, not moving, not scanning, just holding steady at the tunnel. For a heartbeat, nothing. No sound but the echo of the crowd realizing they had been forced quiet. And then he walked out. No music, no pyrotechnics, just the sound of his shoes against the ramp. Steady, unhurried, like a man walking to his morning coffee. The contrast was sharp enough to sting. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They rose. Then the noise built, not explosive, not chaotic, but rising like a swell, a sound that felt like respect given shape. Applause broke into chants, chants into roars, until the roof shook. What had been entertainment a moment earlier now felt like witness. He didn't raise his arms, didn't smile. His eyes stayed forward, his expression calm, almost detached. He stepped into the ring with the same quietness he'd walked out with, pausing only to touch the corner post with his palm, a gesture so small most missed it. But for the older fans watching, it was the kind of ritual that said everything. He wasn't here for theater. He was here for truth. The referee called them to the center. The young fighter bounced on his toes, throwing sharp feints into the air, his grin reappearing with every motion. He leaned forward slightly, so close his words wouldn't carry to the microphones. "I'll finish this quick," he muttered, his breath hot with adrenaline. Norris didn't blink. His eyes met the kids with a level, piercing stillness. "We'll see what quick means to you," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the arena anyway, amplified not by speakers, but by silence. The kids' grin twitched, just for a second, before snapping back into place. Around them, the crowd leaned in. Thousands of bodies pressed forward as if the first punch would land on them too. You could feel the weight of it, a collective breath being held, waiting for the bell. The referee stepped back. The timekeeper lifted his hand. For the briefest instant, the arena froze completely. No sound, no movement, just tension stretched so tight it could snap. The gong was coming, and in that suspended moment, everyone in the building realized the same thing at once. This wasn't spectacle anymore. It was a verdict waiting to be read. The gong cracked through the air like a rifle shot, cutting the tension that had swollen the arena to bursting. The crowd roared instantly, a tidal wave of sound, yet inside the ring it was as if someone had pressed mute. The two men stood in the eye of the storm, locked in a silence so sharp it hummed louder than the screams above them. The younger fighter wasted no time. He surged forward like a spring uncoiling, fists snapping out in quick succession. His punches came in flurries, left, right, feint, low kick, another right. It was everything his highlight reels promised: speed, spectacle, a show for the cameras. Sweat flicked off his brow with each strike, his chest heaving as though even the air couldn't keep up. From the stands, it looked like dominance, like the old man had been caught flat-footed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shouted, "He's too slow! He's too slow!" But inside the ring, it was different. Norris's movements were small, almost invisible. Half steps, subtle turns of the shoulders, a head tilt just enough for the fist to whistle past. He didn't retreat far. He stayed within inches of danger, letting the strikes graze air in front of his face or skid across the space his body had just left. To those watching closely, it wasn't slowness. It was efficiency, each dodge delivered at the final fraction of a second. To the casual eye, though, it looked like he was cornered, surviving by luck. The young fighter sensed it. His grin widened between combinations, confidence ballooning with every near miss. He pressed harder, jabbing, then circling, throwing a wild spinning back fist that whooshed past Norris's ear. The crowd leapt to its feet, screams ricocheting off the rafters. The fighter laughed out loud, taunting as his fists continued their rhythm. "You can't even hit me," he barked, voice sharp and cocky, meant as much for the microphones as for his opponent. Norris's expression didn't change. He breathed steady, eyes locked, every step measured like a man pacing a corridor he'd walked 1,000 times. He hadn't lifted a fist yet, hadn't thrown a single strike. His body language read not as overwhelmed but as patient, the way a hunter waits for an animal to tire itself against its own fear. The contrast was startling. One man danced with noise, breath, laughter, shouts, exaggerated gestures that filled the space with bravado. The other moved with silence, so little wasted motion that it felt eerie, as though he were dissolving between blows rather than avoiding them. The crowd felt the split, but didn't know which story was true. Half of them roared for the storm of punches, convinced they were seeing the beginning of the end. The other half grew quieter, leaning forward, sensing something else, that the storm was burning itself out against nothing. The young fighter, drunk on his own momentum, pressed Norris into the ropes, hammering hooks into the air, his breath loud, his face slick. Each swing pulled more energy from his body, and yet none of it landed. Norris pivoted, stepped sideways, leaned just enough to let the ropes absorb the stray impact of fists that had missed their mark. He moved as if guided by an unseen rhythm, always one beat ahead of contact. Then it happened. Norris stopped moving. Not completely, just enough to break the pattern. He planted both feet square, lifted his chin slightly, and let the younger man see him, really see him, for the first time in the fight. His eyes fixed on the fighters with a calm so absolute it sliced through the noise of the arena. The punches halted mid-swing. For a breathless second, the younger man stood frozen, knuckles inches from a face that hadn't flinched. The grin faltered. The laughter died in his throat. Around them, the roar of the arena dimmed, not by volume but by awareness. Thousands of voices sensing a shift without knowing why. Norris still hadn't thrown a strike, still hadn't spoken. But in that silence, eyes locked, body still, the entire arena felt it. Something had changed. The storm of punches no longer looked like dominance. It looked like desperation. Gasps rippled. Chants stuttered into silence. Even the commentators hesitated, words snagged in their throats as they tried to process what the audience already knew. The fight had tilted, and the old man hadn't lifted a finger. The young fighter swallowed, his chest heaving, sweat dripping onto the canvas. His fists lowered just a fraction, not from choice, but from the weight of that gaze. For the first time, his speed, his noise, his bravado didn't feel like weapons. They felt like masks, and someone had just pulled them off. The arena held its breath. Norris hadn't struck. He hadn't spoken. Yet the fight no longer belonged to the younger man. Something was about to happen. Mid-round arrived without fanfare, the way fatigue creeps in. First at the edges of vision, then in the hands, then behind the eyes. The crowd's roar had settled into a heavy hum, a pressure against the eardrums. Sweat ran in clean lines down the young fighter's temples, stinging one eye. He blinked hard, more annoyed than worried. He told himself the pause in Norris's movement was proof of advantage. He told himself he was dragging an old man to the deep end. He went to collect the debt. He snapped a jab, fast enough to blur, then doubled it, then threw a right hand that should have forced a guard to fold. Norris didn't meet force with force. He let the glove graze the negative space between cheek and shoulder, stepping a quiet half-inch inside the line where punches die. The young fighter reset with a grunt and shot a low kick for punctuation. Norris's shin met it like a wall. The sound, a sharp, bright knock, drew a ripple of discomfort from the lower rows. The kid heard it and mistook the flinch for fear. He laughed through his mouthguard, huffing. "Too slow. You hear me? Too." He didn't finish the sentence. Norris's feet had already written a new sentence on the canvas. One small pivot carried him off the rope line, shoulders turning as though the ring had just tilted under him. The young fighter chased and overstepped by a fraction. The fraction arrogance always lends. Norris's lead hand touched the inside of his wrist. No grab, just contact, and redirected the road his punch wanted to travel. The kid stumbled a half-pace, not visible to anyone, but those watching for balance rather than power. He recovered on instinct, furious at gravity's nerve, and fired a hook meant to reset the narrative. Norris let the hook pass within a finger's width of his jaw. His answer wasn't theatrical. Two knuckles slid into the soft just under the ribs, placed with such exactness that the body felt it before the brain logged it. There was no big sound, no head snap to sell to camera, just the quiet thud of a hand closing a drawer that fit. The kid's breath vanished. Not all of it. Enough. His face flickered, the grin quick drying into confusion. His right knee softened as if asking the floor for a favor. He pulled back, shocked to find the air thinner than it had been a second earlier. In the fourth row, a man who had bet his week's spare cash on youth whispered, "Oh!" like a prayer. The crowd knew before their mouths did. The hum altered pitch. People stopped shouting instructions and started listening. Commentators, trained to fill silence, suddenly let it breathe, because the ring had said something clearer than language. The young fighter forced composure into his legs and came again, trying to paste swagger over the wobble. Double jab, feint high, step to the outside. He reached for angles he'd practiced 1,000 times under kinder lights. Norris existed an inch to the left of all of them. A slip at the last moment. A shoulder turn that made leather brush fabric instead of bone. The kid threw a right hand to the chest to reassert geography. Norris answered by not being there, and, as the hand sailed past, placing another short body shot on the opposite side, same depth, same truth. I know where you live. Panic is crafty. It dresses as urgency. The kid mistook both for speed and doubled his pace. His feet drummed the canvas. He tried a spinning elbow because the crowd would recognize it as bravery, and his ego would recognize it as proof. The elbow met an absence that felt personal. Norris's hand rode the triceps past like he was guiding a friend through a doorway. The kid turned into his own emptiness, off balance again, and the ropes caught a piece of his momentum like a net. He snarled now, words spilling because fists weren't proving enough. "Fight me! Hit me for real!" He pounded his own chest with his glove, a theater that always plays better on a screen than in a ring. Norris didn't answer with sound. He took one small step forward, chin level, and the step said, "I am here, and you are loud, and these things are not the same." The young fighter fired a flurry born of spite more than plan. Norris's forearms created shelves where strikes lost height. His head movement stole inches, not miles, enough to let punches miss by the amount that breaks confidence. He placed a third shot to the body, identical in length and weight to the first two, and the kid's breath audibly hitched. Somewhere high up, a chant stuttered, died, and returned as something different. Not his name, not Norris's, just a sound of recognition that the fight had shifted coordinates. "Control," Norris said, finally, a word, almost conversationally, eyes steady. "You're in a hurry." Real power lives in control. He didn't say it to win the room. He said it like a coach, correcting a posture no one else saw. The microphones caught it anyway, carried it to the cheap seats, to kitchens, to bars. The sentence landed like a jab in the country's ribs. The kid, stung by the tone as much as the contact, gambled. He lunged. He tried to clinch, to drown stillness in friction, to prove that chaos beats math. Norris framed his head with a palm and guided rather than fought, pivoting on a heel. The kid's arms closed around the space Norris had vacated. His own momentum pulled him a step past center. He corrected with an angry stomp and paid for it. Norris's hand printed the sternum, a short, stern note that told the heart to keep time. Now the crowd was fully present. They weren't just watching, they were learning. Applause rose in tatters, then cohered. People who had come to see an old myth punctured found themselves cheering the quiet geometry of risk managed well. The young fighter heard the sound and misread it as betrayal. His eyes flashed hot, then uncertain. He tried one last sequence as designed in glossy gyms. Jab to draw guard, low kick to set weight, stepping right hand to close the door. The jab touched glove. The kick met shin again, this time with less commitment. As the right hand crossed, Norris's torso turned, not much, and his left forearm brushed the biceps, shaving force, while his right hand slid inside the punch's path. He didn't counter to the head. He touched the body again, same two knuckles, same depth. And then, as the kid folded a breath late, he placed his palm on the back of the shoulder and set the young man exactly where he needed to stand to stay upright. It looked like mercy. It was also instruction: stand here, breathe here, learn here. The kid stared at him, mouth open to grab air that felt rationed. The grin had abandoned him entirely now. In its place was a boy who had been told a secret and didn't yet know whether to be angry at the truth or grateful. Sound returned with shape. The arena stood as one body, clapping that wasn't triumphal so much as relieved. The chant changed color, no longer a dare to finish quickly, but a recognition that something older than hype had stepped into the ring and refused to be hurried. The young fighter backed a step on instinct and discovered he didn't know where safe was anymore. Norris stayed where he was, hands low, eyes kind but unyielding. The very picture of a man who has no interest in humiliation because instruction is cleaner. "Control," Norris repeated, softer now, as if the word might land better if it didn't have to shout. The young fighter nodded without meaning to, the way a head bows when a muscle relaxes after holding too tight for too long. The bell hadn't rung. The round still had seconds in it, but time felt different. Longer, clearer, less available to waste. The kid's corner shouted fragments. Hands up, breathe, reset, like throwing rope to someone already standing on shore. He heard them the way you hear your name called in a crowd. Distant, indistinct, somehow meant for someone else. He lifted his gloves and told his legs to step forward. They did. He told his pride to catch up. It tried. And above it all, the building breathed with him, waiting to see whether the next choice would be speed again, or the first hint of control. The final seconds carried a weight different from the rest of the fight. The crowd stood shoulder to shoulder, phones raised like lanterns, but inside the ropes, the world had shrunk to two men, and the thin air between them. The young fighter's chest heaved, every breath scratched like sandpaper. Norris looked unchanged, still as a tree in calm wind. The kid tried to mask fatigue with bravado. He feinted, threw a jab, circled. Nothing landed. Norris didn't chase, didn't even seem interested in scoring. He just waited, feet balanced, eyes steady. That patience cut deeper than punches. It told the kid he was fighting not a man, but a mirror. So he gambled. Pride shoved him forward into a flying knee, his body arching high under the lights. For one instant, it looked spectacular, every poster promise fulfilled. But Norris wasn't there. He pivoted lightly, caught the momentum at the arm and shoulder, and turned it. The kid hit the canvas flat, air driven out in a gasp that echoed to the rafters. The arena froze. Then came the roar, not wild but unanimous, the sound of thousands realizing they had just seen the difference between show and mastery. Norris didn't pounce. He crouched, set a hand on the young man's shoulder, and held him there long enough to let calm return. "Breathe," he said, quiet, almost private. The microphones carried it everywhere. The ref hovered, uncertain if he should end it. Norris released before the decision came, standing clear. The young fighter rose shakily, legs untrustworthy, but he forced them to obey. His gloves stayed up out of instinct, not confidence. Norris stepped forward, close enough that the words couldn't be misunderstood. "A belt sits on the waist," he said evenly. "Strength lives here." He tapped his chest. "This is the part you still have to build." The kid's face shifted. Anger, shame, then something softer. The grin that had carried him vanished completely. In its place was a silence almost as strong as the one across from him. The bell ended the round. The referee lifted Norris's arm, but the fight had already been decided in posture and presence. Applause rumbled into a standing ovation. Some cheered the legend, others cheered the lesson, but the noise belonged to both. The kid looked at Norris again, then extended his glove. "Teach me," he said. Not loud, not for cameras, just enough to be heard. "Come tomorrow," Norris replied, tone casual, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. "Bring the part of you that listens." The handshake lasted a moment longer than necessary. Cameras caught it, but the weight belonged only to them. The arena didn't see humiliation. It saw humility being born. As the fighters left, the floor bore their story in sweat and scuffs. Commentators replayed the throw, replayed the quiet words, replayed the outstretched hand. Yet what lingered wasn't the clip, but the stillness after. The lesson that noise burns fast, while control stays. The young fighter had entered to prove himself against a name. He left with something heavier and more useful. The knowledge that pride is brittle, and respect is the ground you learn to stand on. That night, people argued who had won. But those who were there knew. The old man had given something rarer than victory. He had given a beginning.